Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my friend, Kendie Schlecht. Welcome to the show, Kendie. It's so wonderful to have you on. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. This is actually the first time I've ever been on a podcast, and it's exciting to be here. And I hope I have some knowledge I can share with your audience.
Oh, and for sure you will. Kendie is a counsel at a law firm down in the Irvine, Southern California area. She's going to be talking about her experience and knowledge related to law and insurance. And our topic is kind of going to be about what can you do if you have to fight your insurance company over a claim? And she's going to share her knowledge and experience in that kind of arena, because that is sort of your specialty as a civil litigator. That's what you target and that's what you work on. So I'm super excited to learn more about this. And you shared something with me before we started, and that was most people don't read their insurance policies until they're already in the middle of a catastrophe, right? You know, your house is flooded or some other major event is going on. And then you look at your insurance policy and you're like, oh my gosh, what does this even mean? And so talk to us a little bit about that, because I think you said that you kind of experienced that where you were in the middle of something major and you were going, what does my policy say?
Right. So yeah, I'm, just like everybody else, you don't like to read the fine print in anything you buy. Like, when was the last time we read the contract when we bought our car, or even when we bought our house? And no one reads their insurance policies. And we're the same way. My husband and I are both lawyers, but we're also consumers. And it's a lot of words and it's very boring. And sometimes you don't even know what you're reading for. So the first thing I really try to tell everyone is an insurance policy is a contract. It all comes back to the contract. So your insurance company they're obligated to insure you for losses and cover you for losses to the extent the contract says so. When you get into a beef with them, it really comes down to what the written word is. So I would encourage you that to the extent you're able to, before anything ever arises, read through it, see if you understand it, take your best shot at it, because there are often some things in there that you're like, oh, my agent didn't tell me this, or I didn't really understand it. And if you are working with an insurance agent, it's a good time to then go back to that insurance agent and say, hey, I didn't understand that part of the policy. Could you explain it to me, help me understand it? And then you're at least arming yourself with a little bit of knowledge before you were like we were, which was in the middle of a flooded house at 7 a.m. trying to figure out, okay, what does our insurance company cover or not cover, or who do I even call to make a claim in that situation? So if I could give people advice, when, read your insurance policy and read the part especially about how do you make a claim? Who do you notify? Who do you call? Who do you email? And some insurance policies have deadlines in them, in terms of sometimes you need to make a claim within 30 days, sometimes within 45 days, sometimes it's just as soon as practical. But it is good to have that little bit of information in your head, just so that you know kind of where to look. And if you don't do any of that, just know where you put your policy, so then you can find it.
Yeah, that's a great point right there. That alone is just remember where you put it, because especially when you're in the middle of something like that, you're not going to be thinking straight. So keeping those important documents in one place where you know exactly where to look for it, that's key, number one. But it's such a great point, like just even trying to read through the basics of your policy. And if you don't understand something, check with your agent. That's such great advice, because you're just not thinking clearly in situations like that, right? Your emotions are running high anyway, and you're stressed. So if you have some of that, information beforehand, it's going to do you, a world of good, right? In preparing you for when those times do happen. Just take a step back for a second. I wanted to ask you, was this the type of law that you envisioned yourself practicing when you decided to study law? And where did you go to school, and how did that all come about? Like, did you know you wanted to be an attorney from the time you were growing up, or was it something that you decided later on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I, grew up watching Perry Mason. My life is nothing like Perry Mason's. and I'm aging myself by even saying Perry Mason. But no, I thought I wanted to go into politics or work at a think tank or do policy analysis, things like that. I did my undergraduate at USC and then took about 2 years off after that to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And as it was a fluke, I ended up working in a law firm as a paralegal, essentially, on the job, and just working with lawyers for a couple of years before I decided what I wanted to do. And what I realized working for a bunch of lawyers was that I thought I could do the job at least as good as they could. And so I was like, well, why don't I just go to law school then? And at that point, my boyfriend, who is now my husband, entered law school. Just seemed, it was like a natural progression into law school. And I think when people enter law school, you have a lot of ideals about kind of what you want to do. You want to do international law, you want to do environmental law, you want to do entertainment law. And a lot of times we say those words without really understanding what they are or what they mean. But I will say most of us end up working, especially in the last 10, 15 years where the job market has been really difficult. We end up working with the firms that hire us because, when you graduate from law school, unless you're one of the very lucky few, your first concern is, I'm going to pay back all of those law school loans. So you go where the jobs are. And I think a lot of that guides you. If you're really lucky, you have a lot of choices. And I was lucky. I got to work in a lot of really great firms, and we got to do a lot of really high profile entertainment law, a lot of some constitutional law, things like that. And I enjoyed it. But it is 110% of your life. I think as you get older and you settle down, if you want to have kids, if you decide you want to have a little more work-life balance, you make adjustments. And what I do like is I think in the last 20 years, the legal community has evolved to allow both men and women more flexibility to define their work-life balance in a lot of different ways. But in terms of insurance, I work at a firm that has a lot of clients who are large corporations who have many, many insurance needs, and they get into fights with their insurance companies a lot. And that was a service that needed to be provided. And it turned out that it was something that I could do for them. And, 25 years after entering legal service, this is kind of where I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Our life is a journey, right? And so when we come out of college, we do kind of have these ideals and we think we're going to do one thing, and life kind of guides us in different directions, and we tend to maybe do something else. Some people, know what they're going to do and continue doing that their whole life. And some people change courses. Although you did jump in and continue with law, it's maybe in different areas. And you mentioned, working on some high profile cases. And there was one in particular that I think that I'd love for you to share. And I'm not going to probably get the details exactly right, but it's a case that you worked on that actually was in the pharmaceutical industry. What ended up happening where that kind of evolved into a case law, I guess. I'm not really sure if that's the right term.
I think that was ICN Pharmaceuticals. If you're okay. Yeah, that was, that was about 20 years ago, but it was a corporate shareholder derivative action. And it was essentially a type of hostile takeover of the pharmaceutical company. And we came in to represent the founder and CEO of the company. And there are a lot of kind of very boring details with when you're talking about corporate derivative actions. But I will tell you, it was quite the spectacle for a while, because in that type of situation, not only are you in federal court, which is a much more formal court, but every time we showed up for everything, there was something like 12 lawyers that were answering, and it was everybody under the sun. But it was a case that we were published on, and it was a very interesting time. And I don't think I slept more than 10 hours a week during those 6 months that we were dealing with it.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And I can't even imagine the amount of pressure that you would be under in a situation like that. So bravo for you for doing that. That's amazing. So let's now jump back into our topic related to the insurance side of things. In your experience, like when you're representing clients, what would you say, like how often are the insurance companies like refusing to pay claims? And, how difficult is it for individuals to fight the insurance company to get these claims paid?
For the average consumer, usually there's kind of two things. There's a duty to defend and there's a duty to indemnify. I'm going to talk about the situation where it's you versus your insurance company, where they're covering your losses. So for instance, let's talk about the burst pipes, because we've usually all had a burst pipe. So you wake up in the morning, there is flooding somewhere in your house. Obviously, there's a giant leak and you make a claim to your insurance company to cover that. Most people will get into a fight over, well, if policy covers it, they will usually say they will pay something. Where you usually get into the biggest fight is the dollar amount, right? Under your general homeowners insurance policy, there's an exclusion that you're going to find in every policy, which is the work and product exclusion. So the way that works is, let's do this. Let's talk about slab leaks in Southern California. A lot of people have slab leaks and pinhole leaks in their pipes. So if you have a pinhole leak in your pipe that eventually gets so bad that it damages your foundation and your flooring and kind of floods your house a little bit, what does the insurance company pay for? So the insurance company will usually say, we're not going to pay for the defective pipe because that's the defective part. And there's usually some language in the policy that says we're not going to pay for the underlying defective part. And some of them may try to just deny the claim altogether, saying, well, no, it was because it was a defective part and we're not going to pay for it. However, under California law, they're required to pay for something called resultant damage, which means that even though they're not going to pay to replace your defective pipes, if the damage from the leaking pipe damaged other components of your home, your flooring, your foundation, your carpet, your paint, your drywall, they do have to pay for that, the cost of repairing that resultant damage. And then they'll send an adjuster, they'll do an estimate, and they'll probably try to lowball you because they're going to say, oh, we can repair all the damage. And they did that to us. Our entire first floor was taken down to nothing. And they said, oh, we see about $7,000 worth of damage here. And really your best, short of hiring an attorney, and I don't often recommend that because there's a huge cost involved in it, your best bet is to paper them early and paper them often, which means there's a paper trail for everything. When they give you an estimate and you ask them, well, what is that based on? Why did you make that estimate? I have another estimate. This is what I've really damaged. Document everything. Here are my photographs. Here are estimates for repair. Give them every piece of information that you have. Everything that they ask for, give it to them, because then what you've done is you've built this dossier essentially of all of your communications with them. Because what happens if they continue to play these types of games, then you can send them a letter saying, you've reached your obligation to repair my house and pay me my damages. And here is every phone call, every email, every correspondence, every photograph, and the time and dates and everybody that I spoke to. And you can send that to them. And usually at that point, if they haven't already, they'll elevate it to a supervisor. And most supervisors I've dealt with, once they see the documentation, they'll come around and they'll do what they should and what is reasonable. And if they don't, and at that point you have to hire a lawyer, you have already done so much work for your lawyer in terms of gathering the facts that not only have you saved your lawyer a ton of work, but you've saved yourself a ton of attorney's fees because now your lawyer doesn't have to spend those hours compiling all of the documentation for you. So you really help yourself in a lot of different ways by just documenting every little bit.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, is keeping all that documentation. And like you said, photograph everything. And we actually had some neighbors, and this is a little bit of a concern of ours because it's in the same company who built the homes. They had a pipe burst in their third floor that flooded all the way down to the first floor and damaged everything in between. So for us, we're obviously concerned, is that going to happen with our pipes? And then what they went through. And as you were explaining, it's like the insurance companies are going to just do the barest minimum that they have to do by compiling all of that information. You're right. You can get it escalated and, get more covered like it should be.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you just don't give up. And I'll tell you, I'm a lawyer. I do this for a living. And when we were going through it with our own house, I felt like I was spending 2, 3 hours a day with the insurance company, calling, emailing, writing, just because they literally weren't being reasonable. I mean, they had offered $7,000 to fix our house. It ended up being more than 10, 12 times that at the end of the day. I'm not going to lie. There were tears. Like I literally was like, I would go to my husband, like, I do this for a living and I can't believe that they're giving me this runaround. So it's going to feel horrible and it's going to feel like you're, just banging your head up against the wall, but you just keep pushing. It is honestly a game of outlasting them. And you just don't give up, just keep pushing. And worse comes to worse, if you have to hire a lawyer, again, you've already done all of that work. And when they do see all of that work, that is, and I can't tell you what amazing ammunition that is. When you have cooperated 100%, you've given them all of the information and they're not responding, then that's when they know they're in trouble legally. So if I can offer any advice, it's literally do not give up. Be reasonable, definitely be reasonable, but don't give up.
Yeah. So what do you think then the likelihood of success in cases like that? I mean, it sounds like because you've got all that documentation, if you have to hire an attorney, you're going to get further along than if you didn't have all of that, right?
Absolutely. It all comes down to, number one, what does the contract say? And for your general claim, it's going to be really clear whether or not it's covered under the policy or not. But it is, the stronger your facts are, and really the fact that you are able to show how many times you reached out to your insurance company, a lot of times they just don't respond to you. And a lot of people give up at that point. If they don't respond to you, that's when I kind of advise you to double down, because they can do a lot of things, but what insurance companies cannot do is they cannot respond to you as their policy holder. They have to respond to your claim. They have to explain themselves, especially if you have a trail where you have tried to reach them as many times as you can, and they're not responding to you and it's dead silence. That's the time you want to keep going. That is not the time to give up.
That's a good point. And so how would somebody go about making a claim? I mean, I'm sure that there's some kind of detail in the policy, but generally, what's the process of making a claim?
Right. So it's generally in your policy, and there will literally be a section in your insurance policy that deals with notification. And usually the default rule is you want to notify them as soon as you're aware of a claim. So as soon as your house floods, or as soon as you get into a car accident, or if God forbid, when you get sued, as soon as you get sued, because oftentimes in your homeowner's liability policies, they have a duty to defend you in many lawsuits too, so that you're not paying out of pocket for a defense attorney in those situations. Whenever you have a claim or a claim is made against you, the old adage is tender early and tender often. So you pick up the phone, you call your insurance agent, whatever is in the insurance company, you get that notice and that tender out to them. And if they don't respond to you, you keep following up with them. Under the insurance regulations, they should give you a response within 40 days. So it's a good idea just to, keep a little calendar, give them, the first 30 or so days. And then, literally every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's your suggestion then for follow-up is wait a general 30-day period. And then if you haven't gotten some kind of response, get on the phone and start, calling daily or weekly and make sure that they've got what they need to be getting back to you to handle this, right?
Yeah, if you follow the instructions in the policy and you've made the notification, they generally have 40 days to respond to your claim. You can wait 40 days if you want to. You don't have to. If you want to keep, pushing them, it's kind of the squeaky wheel situation. So it never really hurts to be a squeaky wheel. But if you just want to calendar something so that you're doing stuff that seems reasonable, tender the claim, give yourself a reminder 30 or 40 days. And then after that, I would say, every couple of days, every week. It all, a lot of times depends on the urgency of your particular situation too. So if you've got stuff that is really dire and can't wait, don't wait the 30 days. Just keep pushing, ask if an adjuster has been assigned, confirm that they got the claim, ask for a claim number. And that claim number is basically your That's essentially your ID badge for every communication that you have with the carrier. So once you get that claim number, you know that you're in their system. Literally, there would be times where I wouldn't even give my name anymore. I would just give my claim number. Once you get that claim number, you know you're in the system. I know it sounds silly, but I can't tell you how many insurance carriers, sometimes you drop into the ether. And if they can't give you a claim number, it's because they lost you. So when you get a hold of someone, tell them, I want my claim number.
Yeah, good point. And you're right. I think it begins to be like, you don't even have a name. Don't even bother with your name. Give them the claim number because that's your identification. That is how they know you, period, full stop.
Kind of, yeah.
So what would you say then would be the time that you would need to hire a lawyer? At what point would you say, okay, this is it, I need to hire a lawyer? And is it really just kind of case by case?
Yeah, it's a really good question, but yes, it is case by case because it depends on kind of how severe your loss is, depends on the amount of damages that you're suffering, how urgent the needs are. And quite frankly, a lot of it is financial because you're going to be paying out of pocket, obviously, to hire an attorney. Even the simplest cases, you can kind of expect to have to go a couple $1,000s out of pocket minimum to even figure out kind of, do you go further or do you stop, or kind of where you are with your attorney. But I think there is everybody kind of reaches their point where they feel like I've done everything I can do and it's been a couple of months and they're just running me around in circles. Depending on your financial situation and kind of how much of an emergency that claim is, then you may want to, contact an attorney at least. Most attorneys will just talk to you and kind of give you an idea of, hey, you could try to do this on your own. And if that doesn't work, then give me a call. And I think most attorneys would do that.
Do you think that it pressures the insurance companies to take it more seriously if you've hired an attorney? Or do you think they're just kind of like, meh, whatever, we don't care? I
think it depends. A lot of it depends on the carrier, and it depends on how right they think they are. If they think that they're completely right on the policy language and the damages, and they have done their homework and they're simply working with an unreasonable claimant, then they're not going to be all that scared to have an attorney contact them because they're just going to say, these are the facts and your client's wrong. But if they haven't done their work and they know that they have completely kind of breached their duties to the policyholder, then that will get them involved. And usually either you'll have a pretty quick resolution, which is always great for the client, or it will escalate on their end too, which means they'll hire their own coverage counsel. And so then you're no longer dealing with the adjuster, you're dealing with another attorney on the other side, and now you're arguing over the policy. So it can go a couple of different directions.
Sure. And you were talking before about generally an attorney will just answer a few questions for you, maybe at like no charge, right? So and I'm sure it probably varies by attorney, but will they work on a contingency basis, like, without any money up front?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because we actually get that question a lot from all of our clients is kind of, at what point do attorneys work on contingency? For insurance recoveries, we generally don't. And that's usually because in the best case scenario, we're making you whole in terms of getting you 100% of everything that you've been damaged. But when that happens, you're going to need all of that money to make yourself whole. And there's really nowhere for the attorney to get paid. So on an insurance claim, for instance, there's no pain and suffering type damages that you can receive. It's basically if it costs $7,000 to repair your house, our job is to get you that $7,000. And so there just isn't a way for us to say, okay, of that $7,000, we're going to take 30% as our attorney's fees, and then you're not going to have enough money to repair your house. So unfortunately, most attorneys, it's really rare that you would find an attorney willing to work on contingency for an insurance claim.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, because I think that sometimes we assume that if we're going to go after an insurance company, we're going to get more than enough to cover the attorney's fees on top of what we need to, cover the cost of the repairs or whatever. And so thank you for kind of explaining that more clearly, because my understanding was you could go after the insurance company to cover that cost as well.
And this gets a little complicated. There are situations where if you sue an insurance company for what's called breach of the implied covenant, breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. And that comes into play when an insurance company is acted in such bad faith that it becomes almost like an intentional wrong against the policyholder. So in those situations, you can file a bad faith lawsuit against your insurance company. And essentially the standard is if you can prove that your insurance company unreasonably and improperly withheld policy benefits from you, then if you're able to prove that, then you can actually get your attorney's fees and costs back as an item of damage. So not only would the insurance company be obligated to pay claim damages, but they would also be ordered to pay your attorney's fees and costs. That never happens again until the end of the lawsuit, and it doesn't happen at settlement. So if you settle a case, even though you've filed a bad faith claim, you can't say, oh, we're settling the case. The insurance company, have to pay my attorney's fees and costs as part of the settlement. There's nothing that obligates them to do that. So in those types of situations, if you get all the way through the lawsuit and you win on that bad faith claim, you can get your attorney's fees and costs back, which essentially reimburses you for what you've already paid your attorney. So that is the kind of unusual situation where you can get that additional recovery. You can also get punitive damages too in like truly, truly egregious situations. But again, those are the type of recoveries where if that happens, then you would get the benefit of that money, but it's almost never on a contingency basis.
Gotcha. Now, we talked before about reaching out to your insurance agent or the broker who helped you with your insurance, setting up the policy. What can they do to assist you through this process? Like, if you don't necessarily have to go the attorney route, what can your broker, your agent do to help you through this process?
Right. That's a really good question. So your agent does have a duty to you to kind of, and there's a little bit of a difference between an agent and a broker. But I think what people should understand is that they're like salespeople at the end of the day. So they're there to sell you an insurance policy. They're there to place an insurance policy for you. So they do not necessarily give advice. They don't have an obligation to tell you what you need in terms of insurance. If you ask them for a particular type of coverage, they should tell you, yes, this policy provides that coverage, or no, this policy doesn't provide that coverage. But I would never 100% rely on your insurance agent or your broker to give you advice just for you necessarily. I would always, always, always read the contract. It's not that different from buying a car, right? You work with someone at the dealership to buy your car, but at the end of the day, what they sell you is going to be part of that contract, not necessarily what they told you. So where I think insurance agents are really helpful is you can call them and say, hey, I have a claim. How do I make that claim? And oftentimes your insurance agent will make that claim for you so that you don't have to, pick up the phone and kind of do it yourself. And then sometimes, like what I've done in the past, and, in your situation where you're worried about your neighbor, for instance, and what would happen if you had the same kind of thing happen to your house, I picked up the phone, called my insurance agent and said, hey, let me ask you hypothetically, if my third floor pipe burst and caused all of this damage, like happened to my neighbor, where do I land on my policy there? And a good insurance agent can actually kind of walk you through that scenario before you ever have to make the claim. And some of them may have, some advice for how you could check, like, hey, if you're not sure if you have a slab leak, take a look at your water meter and, see if it changes. And a lot of times they have like really helpful tidbits, because what I will tell you, if you're using a local insurance agent, they kind of know what claims are being made generally under those policies for your area, for the time, for the weather. So they've got a pretty good pulse on what's going on amongst their policyholders and in their region. And they can kind of talk you through a lot of that stuff. So they're actually pretty useful for a lot of that information, even when, you're not making a claim.
Oh, that's excellent. Great point that you brought up there about just even getting some general information and knowledge, because yes, you said they're going to know what's happening with their other policyholders. We've been having a lot of storms in California recently. And so that's causing, I'm sure, a ton of damage for people throughout the state. And so I'm sure that, agents in the different areas are beginning to see those things kind of happen. So they would be a well of knowledge there to assist you in determining what's going on with your policy, right? To make sure that you're kind of covered if need be.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned floods. I think what a lot of people don't know, because we don't live in flood zones, most of our insurance policies in Southern California have a flood exclusion. Mm-hmm. So many of our homeowners policies do not cover floods at all. And that's usually a specific endorsement that's written into a policy. And it's a pretty expensive one. And if you talk to your agent, they generally don't recommend it unless you live in a flood zone. And as most of us know, in California, we don't have earthquake coverage under our homeowners policy. And that is a separate policy that you have to buy from the state. So, it is interesting because you just assume that, oh, I've got a homeowners policy, it covers everything, but not necessarily.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point that you just brought up about the earthquake insurance too, because generally what you see is additional documents that are coming in saying, oh, by the way, like you don't have earthquake coverage. Right. So do you want to get earthquake coverage, or are you going to skip it? And you've got, to fill those forms out and say, right. Yes, I want it specifically. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Great point. Well, so to go back a little bit to your time during law school, and this is kind of a question because our daughter is looking to become an attorney. What would you say, like, how much control did you have when you were going through, your schooling to determine the direction that you were going to go? Her interest is kind of the immigration law, or she might want to be a civil litigator.
It's different people will disagree, and I'm 25 years into it, and I tend to be more pragmatic. It comes down to money. To a large extent, you're in law school, and the stuff that we want to do, like immigration rights, environmental rights. When you pick a job that essentially is working, for the people, they don't pay well. And the thing is I'm not saying you don't do it. I'm just saying it's a very conscious choice in terms of, do you want to pursue a path that pays really well, or do you want to pursue a path that serves the public interest? And I'm not saying that they can't overlap. I'm just saying it's very rare that they overlap. But if you choose a public interest route, and I have many friends who've done it, and they are amazing attorneys, there are real benefits to it. For instance, there are many loan forgiveness programs, so that if you are in public interest law and you've practiced in that area for a certain amount of time, it used to be 10 years, and you earn under a certain amount, then after that time period, your loans are forgiven. That is the lender's way of saying thank you for working in public interest law. The other thing that public service law has that we don't have is if you're working for the government, if you're the DA, a prosecutor, the Attorney General's office, they have pensions, and their pensions are fantastic. So you put in your full career, you put in your full 25 years or whatever. It changes periodically, but you put in and you become fully vested. You have that pension that is going to protect you essentially throughout your retirement. And listen, as I get closer to retirement age, I'm pretty envious of my friends who are in civil service, because they're getting close to that full pension. And that essentially allows them to earn, depends on when they came in, but anywhere from 75 to 100% of their salary going forward. So it's trade-offs. But with that said, for your daughter, if she goes to law school, I would say pursue everything that speaks to you while you're in law school. If there's a clinic that you're interested in, if you want to work on domestic violence, gun violence, immigration clinics, take all of the opportunities that are available to you in law school, because it's the time for you to kind of like spread out and do it. If you want to be a prosecutor, go for that internship with the DA's office. If you think you want to be a clerk, look for an externship, with the judge. I would explore everything and anything while she's in law school. And then she can decide when she graduates which direction she wants to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for going into all that detail. I appreciate that as kind of a side note for us there. But it did lead me to think of something else. And that's if somebody were, say, older and decided they wanted to go back to school to become an attorney, what is that kind of process like? And do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah. Surprisingly, when I was in law school 25 years ago, we had a fourth class, and it was essentially the evening program. And the evening program program was primarily comprised of people in their second, third careers, or people who had raised their kids and their kids were older and they wanted to go back to law school. And that was an evening program. And they did it like 4 evenings during the week. And they graduated either, and I'm trying to remember if it was 3 years or 4 years, but it was 3 years. They graduated with us. And most of them did it because they had full-time jobs during the day, or they, had something that they had during the day. So there are wonderful programs from highly accredited law schools where you can go, and do that. And I would encourage it too, because doctors who become lawyers, engineers who become lawyers are really actually very highly sought after. If you have an engineering background and you have a law degree, you're so desirable in terms of doing patent work with certain firms that it's going to be really hard for you to choose a job, not find a job, but it's going to be hard for you to choose a job. So there are a lot of these kind of second careers that pair really well with law if people have an interest in doing that.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Kendie, so much for your time on this, the insurance, different types of law. And I so appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and the experience that you've had throughout your career, and the detail and the information that you shared today is super helpful. And I so appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.